So let's begin. We're here to discuss how to determine who is top dog at the level of the individual researcher, the department, the school, and the university. As I think all of us are very aware, both personal status and real money depend on the top dog rankings, which have become an industry in themselves. Long ago, in a previous century, when I was an academic economist at Harvard and Stanford, one's academic standing was largely determined by the number of sole-authored papers in the handful of top-tier journals. These days, there are many, many more academics and an accompanying proliferation of journals with specialization on a myriad of subtopics. So the previous simple method has been replaced by more complex considerations. Our individual challenge as researchers and our institutional challenge in allocating scarce resources to individual and collective research is how to measure the quality of research, the quality of a research paper. How can we determine whether research is making an impact and is considered important? And that's the subject of today's presentations and the subsequent discussion. I have to remind you that we don't have total discretion in how we do that. Aston University, along with many other universities and research organizations, has signed up to the San Francisco Declaration on Research Assessment, affectionately known as DORA, to ensure that quality and impact of research outputs are, to quote, measured accurately and evaluated wisely. At a day-to-day operating level, our commitment to DORA means that we will not use journal-based metrics such as journal impact factors to indicate the quality of individual research articles during recruitment, promotion, or funding activities. We are committed to assessing each piece of research on its own merits rather than by the ranking of the journal in which it's published. To do this, DORA recommends a broad range of impact measures, such as influence on policy and practice. Fine. So how then are we going to measure research quality? That's the topic we're going to take on today. One measure is provided by so-called Altmetrics, which include metrics based on societal and in particular social media impact. Altmetrics are based on indicators like usage statistics, mentions, captures, Twitter feeds, media, and other platforms where the research in question is being discussed. This is a growing field, but has yet to achieve consensus on how to choose, analyze, and combine sources of data to provide a reliable indicator of influence. Citations are a very broadly accepted tool to assess the quality of research output, but they also have drawbacks. They don't actually capture practitioner use of research, and there are very different citation practices in various disciplines and even within a discipline. And of course, there are the games around self-citation and reciprocal citing. So this webinar is going to explore alternative measures of impact with a focus on altmetrics, social media, and citations. The event comprises 4 quite brief presentations as follows. A presentation on citations and their value by Nicholas O'Regan. A presentation on altmetrics by Daniel Ridge. A presentation on leveraging social media by Fiona Ellison. And a collection of tips on increasing citations from Pawan Budwa. These presentations will be followed by a panel discussion. And I want to remind you, you may have seen it across the top of the screen in any event, we're recording this session and the recording will be made available shortly and you will be notified. Let me give some brief bios of the participants in the presentations, the givers of the presentations, and then we'll move on to the presentations themselves. Starting with Nicholas O'Regan, who is an editor of the Journal of Strategy and Management and the Associate Dean for Research at the Aston Business School. He's published in numerous international journals and is on the editorial board for journals such as Technovation. Nicholas was elected a Fellow of the Academy of Social Sciences in 2011. He'll be followed by Daniel Ridge, who's a publisher at Emerald Publishing, where he oversees a large portfolio of business strategy, entrepreneurship, and corporate social responsibility journals. Before joining Emerald, Daniel taught at Vanderbilt University and was co-editor of the journal AmeriQuests. Fiona Ellison is also a publisher at Emerald Publishing. She's a publisher for learning and development journals and books in the HR, leadership, organizational studies area. She has over 14 years of experience working in academic publishing, including 8 years at ProQuest, 2 years at Cambridge University Press, and coming now up to 3 years at Emerald. Pawan Budwa is the head of the Aston Business School and Professor of International Human Resource Management in the school. Prior to joining Aston in 2003, he was at Cardiff and Manchester. His research looks at various aspects of HRM, work processes, sustainability, and organizational performance in international contexts. Pawan, as many of you know, is widely published in leading journals, has written or edited 25 books and won many research-related awards. He's also won more than 30 research grants. He's the co-editor-in-chief with the British Journal of Management, a fellow of the Academy of Social Sciences, the British Academy of Management, and the Indian Academy of Management. Excellent. With that said, let me turn the proceedings over to Nicholas. As I say, if you have questions, just put them in the chat bar, and at the end of the 4 presentations, I'll pull out questions and ask our presenters to respond to them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, George. I'm now about to share the screen. And my presentation is looking at what are the benefits of citations. And I would start by saying, how many people have wondered what happens to their work once it's published? How many of your papers never get cited by anybody? And that's quite disheartening for any researcher. And in 2007, Mayhoe mentioned in the physics world, and I have no doubt that figures have changed since then, but 90% of papers were never cited according to him. And 50% were never read by anyone other than the authors, the referees, and the journal editor. Now, you must ask, what a demoralizing situation to be in if your paper is never cited or never read by anybody. And much of the reasons why it may not be read by anybody are all within your own grasp. So what I want to look at is citation analysis and what are the benefits of it and how can they help you. Now, citation analysis looks at what is the importance or the impact of an author, of the article, or a publication by counting the number of times it's been cited. It's an indicator of impact, if you like, based on the analysis of the citation. First of all, the impact side. It establishes the impact that a particular piece of work has or had by identifying which authors based their work on it or cited it within their own papers. It looks at the importance of it. Look at what are the works that are important. You only cite works that clearly underpin your research or are important. And how your research findings are being used. In short, this is looking at what the impact a particular author has within his or her field, broken down by the number of citations, by discipline or by country, or whatever measure you are looking at. Citation analysis also enables you, as Daniel has pointed out, to look at to identify potential collaborators. There may be a means of confirming your results or extending them. Either way, there are future opportunities. So we want to be in the top 10, and researchers work to extend or build on past work to discover new knowledge, as we know. So the first thing you do is identify gaps in existing research and use the literature base to underpin what your research is all about. If your work is cited, then it is clear that you've made an impact in the field. It is clear that your work is original, with findings that are original. It is a validated source of information to others. They're using it, and they're using it to underpin their research. It's a guide, of course, as well for other researchers within their field. And above all, the important point here is that it enhances your credibility as a researcher if you are cited more and more. Of course, it helps others by showing what methods you used, and I guess others use it to identify or to show what rigor their research has because they have considered your research in their research journey. If you're not cited or not highly cited, the chances are that you're probably working in a niche field. You're probably publishing in a language other than English, or you're probably focusing on books, or you're probably ignoring citations completely, which is what this particular webinar is meant to address. Now, citations, where they come from. There are three main sources of citations. The first one, of course, is the Web of Science. Web of Science looks at high-profile journals, scientific publications. It does not include citations to books, book chapters, working papers, conference papers, and so forth, or indeed any journal articles not published in non-ISI journals. Scopus by Elsevier is well known, looks at peer-reviewed literature, scientific journals, and so forth. Google Scholar, of course, is probably the one that most of us would probably know much better. It looks at a wide range of sources, and as a result, of course, Google Scholar provides what others would say is a more comprehensive picture of recent impact. And this is by far more relevant to the social sciences and humanities than other areas. It includes non-scholarly citations, but of course those inclusions do not impact on your subsequent H index. And again, the H index is quite important to bear in mind. Other tools that look at these things, Scholarameter, Publish or Perish is a fantastic website and is one that I would advise everyone to look at. And Skyval, of course, by Elsevier, that's a tool to assess and benchmark what your research performance is. And analysis, again, can be done in different levels. For example, a group level, a university level, or whatever. So when you are thinking about citations, where do you start? What is a better way of guaranteeing that there will be some citations? And some of the areas that I would like to cover are joint authored or single authored. Well, the research shows that joint authored papers receive more citations than single authored papers. Joint papers are disseminated more widely. Of course, there are more people involved to do that. That means there's greater awareness of them. There's greater propensity to cite them. And joint authors, of course, also means that one or more of the authors are in various networks, and their networks tend to cite them also. So we can conclude from this that a single authored paper has got some obstacles to overcome if it is to reach the level of citations of a joint authored paper. The next one is internationalization. Now, this is an area that comes up over and over again, particularly in the QS rankings and in others. Internationally co-authored papers receive more citations than nationally co-authored papers. And this is not a surprise finding as such. So preparing for your citation count, what about the journal? Well, the higher the journal's impact factor, the higher the number of authors, of well-cited authors, the higher the number of self-citations. And of course, more self-citations in turn feed into the journal's impact factor. So it's a circular movement there. So are citations helped by the output type? What are you working on and does it help? Well, again, complex quantitative methods receive higher citations. And those are things like structural equation modeling, meta-analysis, longitudinal studies, independent data sources, and so forth. Interestingly, there's no significant link between practical relevance and article citations. So that raises some questions going forward for the knowledge exchange and the transfer of research findings. Do reviews help? Yes, reviews and meta-analysis get higher citations. They get higher citations than empirical studies. Review articles, theoretical articles, they all get higher citations. Case studies, no significant effect according to the literature. So, ways that citations can help you. Daniel mentioned many areas in which you can identify who's quoting your work and what they're using it for. And it's a means of understanding how useful, how impactful your research is. It's also a means of looking at how, which areas you should focus on. What are the emerging patterns? Which papers get the most citations that you have? Are these areas that are likely to lead you to have expertise in that area and recognize expertise internationally? They, of course, also enable you to make a comparison with your peers. But of course, as this note says, they must be in the same discipline because citation counts differ between disciplines. But again, many people look at their H index, they look at their number of citations, and many people take great satisfaction from that, while others who do not promote their research very widely wonder why they don't get the citations. Citations also gives credibility, grants applications, funding, other applications. So feeding into the research agenda now, as George mentioned earlier, individual researchers really need to ensure that they are well cited, because citations are a relatively quick objective measure. Whether you like them or don't, they are a measure that is accepted pretty widely. There are a few pitfalls, and of course, pitfalls also have got some advantages. Beware of the comparisons across disciplines. They do differ immensely. Most citations, particularly in Web of Science and in Scopus, focus on journal articles rather than reports. Citations can be positive. Most are, or negative. Try to avoid being a negative cited piece of work. On the other hand, papers with 2 or more authors, each are given the citation count, irrespective of what their contribution is to the paper. So if you've got 5 authors on a paper and you only contribute 5% to that paper, you get the same citation count as the author who might have contributed 80%. But beware, it's just one measure, and we certainly shouldn't focus on that one measure only. A number of questions that have been raised are aspects like, why is my citation much higher in Google Scholar than in Web of Science or Scopus? Well, it's much higher because Google Scholar covers many more sources, and Google Scholar is seen as giving evidence of broader intellectual and international impact than is possible with the other databases. So to finalize, we have an immense amount of data. There's growing in online interfaces, as David mentioned about the donut embedded in articles. There is so much data there that we can now use. Citation data is becoming more and more important. I simply say you cannot ignore it. And hopefully this seminar or this webinar will give you the knowledge that citations are very, very important, and you will make every effort to increase your citations. Thank you very much, George.
Nicholas, thank you. And let's go on to Daniel.
I'm going to be sharing my PowerPoint. All right, so I'm going to be talking about altmetrics. This is going to be a basic overview of altmetrics or alternative metrics, which will allow you to see how your work receives broader attention beyond traditional academic bibliometrics such as citation scores. So, and then further, my colleague who will follow me, Fiona Allison, will be giving a specific advice on how to leverage social media to bring attention to your published articles. So by the end of the session, you have a clear understanding of altmetrics, how to use altmetrics tools, and where to find altmetrics data on dimensions, which is helpful if your publisher doesn't provide it. So altmetrics and dimensions, which I'll be talking about today, are owned and operated by Digital Science, and Emerald Publishing and myself are in no way affiliated with this company. But like most academic publishers, we subscribe to their products, use the information they gather. Everything that I'll be showing you today is free to all researchers and can be found at altmetric.com and app.dimensions.ai. From my point of view, for a researcher, everything you can find here is free. However, your institution may have a subscription, so it may be worth speaking to your department or the library if you want to take a deeper dive into the data. What is Altmetrics? Well, Altmetrics gathers data from non-traditional sources such as news, blogs, and social media. Specifically allows you to see who is talking about your work, where, and in what way. In this way, it's complementary to traditional citation-based analysis. So here we have a little visual. Traditional bibliometrics measure a journal's impact factor, citation counts, and H-index, while alternative metrics track where an article is being discussed and how. We see here news reports, Wikipedia, etc. So these are the sources that Altmetrics tracks, and I imagine that you're familiar with most of them. This includes news outlets like the BBC, but also smaller, even regional news sources. It tracks social media like Twitter and Facebook, post-publication peer review like Publons, reference managers like Mendeley, and policy documents. So if your article is referenced in a policy document put out by a think tank, Altmetrics will pick this up for you and identify the source. It also tracks sources like Wikipedia, YouTube, and Reddit. So here we have, so this is what the Altmetrics score looks like. So first of all, it's becoming very popular with most major academic publishers, and many are actually embedding the Altmetric donut right into the published article. So I've taken an example here from Emerald Insight, and this is the platform that holds all of Emerald content. So next to the article, why local governments rarely use PPPs in the road development projects, we find the color-coded donut with a score of 2 in it. The color and the score correspond to the media source that references the article, which is associated with a point system that I'll explain here in a moment. Notice that the Altmetric score is article specific. It's not given to the journal, but to the individual article, which is really empowering for you as an author. Here we have the corresponding colors of the donut, which obviously change depending on the source of the reference. So you see that news is red, blog is yellow, Twitter is blue, etc. You don't have to know these or memorize them because when you go into Altmetrics, it'll show you what they are. And it'll be embedded with the article, and I'm going to show you how to find that on Dimensions. I'll give you a moment to look at that. So you have YouTube, Reddit, LinkedIn, a lot of these that you're familiar with. So how is the Altmetric attention score calculated? So you most likely notice the attention score in the middle of the donut. This is a weighted score that corresponds to the source where the article is referenced. This makes sense because news articles or a policy document have more real-world impact than a Twitter reference. The attention score is a whole number, which means that points that are less than 0, such as Facebook, are rounded up when the score is less than 1. A public Facebook reference is given 0.25 points, which means that 4 or less references give 1 point, but 5 references will bring that up to 2 points. And I just learned that Pinterest, Google+, Weibo, and LinkedIn are not tracked as sources anymore because their content is behind a login page, so Altmetrics can't access that data. News outlets, so if you notice you have an 8 there, all of these will go up to 8 points, for example, but the score depends on the reach of the source. So the New York Times would get 8 points, but a regional news source would maybe get 4 or 5 points. All of these scores are weighted in different ways and are meant to prevent authors, journal editors, publishers, whoever, from gaming the system. So, for example, on Twitter, retweets count for 0.85 rather than 1 point because they're second-hand attention rather than original attention. Also, they take into account the number of followers that a person has and what that source is. So a publisher is obviously going to be tweeting about an article or a journal or a book for publicity reasons. And they take that into account, and that does not receive as high of a score as it would be from a researcher. But in my opinion, after working with this and looking at it, the score itself is not very important. For you as an author, you want to see where your article is getting attention, who's looking at it, and how it's being shared. So you'll want to be looking at who specifically is tweeting your article. So just to sum up, what does this tell us? It lets you see what type of attention the research is receiving and where. It also lets you know exactly what countries. I'm going to be showing you all of this detail in a moment in very practical terms. But it lets you know what countries are engaging with the content, and it gives you a sense of its actual influence on policy and research, and if you're engaging new audiences. So for example, one of my authors published an article on the UK food system, and through Altmetrics, they found that it was food banks and charitable foundations that were tweeting about the article and blogging about it. And this was news to the author. They didn't know that they had this audience. So that sort of changed the perspective of that author and the work that they were doing. So it's important for those reasons as well. So now let's go back to our article. This is what I had pulled up earlier, why local governments rarely use PPPs in their road development projects. So again, in the bottom right-hand corner, we have the Altmetric donut. Now, all publishers don't have this, and I'm going to show you if your article is peer-reviewed in a journal and you go to it online and there is no Altmetric score, I'm going to show you how to look at dimensions so you can find that score. But a lot of publishers like Emerald will have it embedded with the article. So here is the embedded one. Now, if you hover over that with your cursor, it'll bring up a basic overview of it being tweeted twice. You have one Facebook reference, a Google Plus reference, and then 31 readers on Mendeley. If you notice, you have the colors there. Mendeley isn't factored into that, but you can still break it down and look at it, and it gives you an idea of the readership. Now, if we click on that, see more details, it brings us to the Altmetrics page. So the Altmetrics page, and it gives us much more detail. So you have the article summary, and then you have across the top, you have the tabs that references. So you have Twitter, Facebook, Google Plus, and then Dimension Citations, which I'll also talk to you about. And these, of course, are specific to the donut. So if there were red in the donut and there were a news reference, you would have a tab that said news, and then you could click on that and find more detail about where it's being cited. So if we scroll down the page, you'll see Twitter demographics. So I'll scroll down the page, and you can see exactly where it's being tweeted. So I hover over that, and you have Mexico has one tweet, and the UK has another tweet. So this will give you an idea of the global scope of where your article is bouncing around. So then what we can do is if we go back up to that top tab and click on Twitter, here we are on the Twitter tab, and you can actually see who tweeted your article and who this person is. So first of all, let's just have a look at this. This is an example, as is a real life example from one of my journals. But this researcher, Dr. Raul Vega, you see that he has 41,452 followers, and he's not an author of the paper. I don't know if he knows these authors, but if you're the author of this paper and somebody who has 41,000 followers just tweeted about your paper, you should know who this person is. So, if this is your article, you should go in, look at who his followers are, and it's an opportunity to expand your network. You should all have Twitter accounts, and this is my advice. You can tweet your article at somebody. So if this guy had tweeted you, he has a large following, you have another article coming out, you tweet about it and you tweet it at him to get his attention, and then maybe he'll retweet it to share within his network. So all this is networking and bringing up the visibility of your article. So earlier I mentioned dimensions and citations. So you see across the top, you have the dimensions and citations tab. If you click on that, it says that we have 7 citations in dimensions, which in dimensions is the tracking system. And it actually gives you information on what article and what journal cited your paper. So we see here that factors affecting public-private partnership, and then below that, the rise of PPPs in the public sector, and that was published in the same journal. But you go down further, and it points out the different citation sources. So now, if your publisher doesn't have Altmetrics the way Emerald does, embedded with the article, you can go to Dimensions, and Dimensions is part of the Altmetrics system. And Dimensions gathers data on peer-reviewed articles, and it links to Altmetrics. Okay. So here's a simple description that I took from the website. So you see, with Dimensions, you can search across multiple content types, ranging from publications to grants, clinical trials, patents, data sets, and policy documents. Everything that I'm showing you today is free. If you have a subscription, you can obviously take a deeper dive into it. But you can find out if a paper had grants, where they got their grants, and it could be a source for you to go and apply to grants with different associations that might not have been on your radar previously. So that's Dimensions, but that's really not the point of my talk today. My point is to show you to get to Dimensions to find your Altmetrics for. So if you go to the Dimensions page, so this is app.dimensions.ai. If you have a peer-reviewed article, you can go across the top, and I just typed in our article here, which is why local governments rarely use PPPs. And then I searched for it and I found it. You can also search for an author, so you can search for yourself and you can find all the articles that you've published that were peer-reviewed. If an article doesn't show up, you can contact Dimensions to point it out to them that it should be on there. So this is what it looks like when you search for an article. If you hover over the Altmetric logo, so you have the basic description, you have the authors, you have the title, you have the basic description, you have citations and Altmetric. So again, this is if your publisher doesn't have the Altmetric donut. You go in, you hover over the Altmetric, and it brings us to what I had shown you previously. So we have 2 tweets, a Facebook page mention, a Google Plus post, and then the Mendeley. And here again, if you click on it, we'll see more details. It brings us to the Altmetric page, and then you can go deeper into that. You can see who tweeted you, who talked about you on Facebook, the Google Plus references. So this is back to the Altmetrics page. Going back to here, you can now hover over the citations, and this tells us that we have a total of 7 citations, 6 being recent. If you click on this, it'll take you into a profile of who tweeted you. So again, we have a basic overview, and if you go down the page, we have the summary, which shows you that the article had been cited 7 times, and 85% of its citations have been received in the past 2 years. So if I look even more into that, the citations, I can then see who had cited you. So you have the individual article, and then the authors and the journal. So this is a chance for you to see who your network is, what scholars are working in the same field as you, who you may want to get in contact with, either through email or at a conference when life goes back to conferences again, and to expand your network. And then also, if you're using Twitter, you can look these people up on Twitter. You can see who they're following. You can see what they're tweeting about. If you have an article coming out that's in reference to their research, you can tweet to them. And again, this is about raising the visibility of your article and getting people to read it and look at it. So I wanted to end on this last graphic. So this is a market overview. This is taken from journals that are this is in business and management and the social sciences. This excludes the sciences, the hardcore sciences on cancer research and such, because that's really not our field. But if you look at this, out of 100% of articles that are published and peer-reviewed, only 29% are mentioned with Altmetrics. So in my opinion, there really is no excuse for this. You should at least be tweeting about your article, and you should be tweeting at people and getting people to raise that profile. So, so that's what I wanted to show you. Like I said, I am not affiliated with Dimensions or Altmetrics, but like I said, everything that I showed you is free, and publishers use it, and you can use it as well. And again, the whole purpose of it is to see who is looking at your work, and then how to leverage it within social media. So thank you, and here's my information. My email is here, dridge@emerald.com. If you want to contact me for any reason. again, I'm not an expert on Altmetrics, but I can point you in the right direction. Or if you're looking for a journal to publish, and I can help you there. So thank you.
So Daniel, thank you very much. And let's go on to Fiona and then Pawan, and then I'm sure there'll be a variety of questions at the end.
Hi everyone, thank you. Okay, so I'm talking about how you can leverage social media to get more visibility on your research. So social media is a really good place to promote your content, to increase its visibility and just get it out there. For the purposes of promoting your research, I would say that Twitter and LinkedIn are going to be the most effective for this. LinkedIn, has gone through some changes, but it is, at the end of the day, it's a promotion platform for you as a person, as an individual. So use it as such, share your research on it, just get it out there onto LinkedIn, connect with people, share the content of the people that you'd like to share yours. If you engage with people, they're likely to engage with you as well. Don't just use it all about yourself, but share what everyone else is doing and you will get shares back. It's also good to really look for groups on LinkedIn that might be relevant to your research area. That's a good way to just connect with people and get more eyes on your research. Request to join them. If you've already got quite a large network on LinkedIn, then you can consider creating your own group and get people into that group. Keep your profile relevant and up to date, just so people know who you are, where you are, and what you were researching in. So the one basic rule for social media in general is engage and be engaging. I do appreciate there's a lot of people on here and you probably have various levels of, how you use social media at the moment. Some of you might be really into it and use it a lot, and some of you might not. So if you are quite into it, I'm sorry if anything of this, what I'm telling you about, you already know, but please bear in mind that some people might not. So it's just about how to use it effectively. So I'm going to talk a bit more about Twitter. I find it's a better and more easier platform to get a larger network. So if you post about your article on Twitter, just tag away, tag your co-authors, your colleagues, your institution. All institutions have their own Twitter. Influencers or well-known names that you think will be interested or would share your tweet. Follow relevant people in your area and influential people. You'll be quite likely to get a follow back. And then if they're following you, then they will see what you are posting. If you need advice, ask people who use it. Ask the editor of the journal who might come to the publisher, and we can help with that. Use images where you can. It's more effective on Twitter to have an image because it just makes the post more visible. If you want to post a high-res image of the journal cover, go to the editor of the journal, and if they don't have one, the publisher will have one, and you can use that. Twitter's less serious as well. You can have a lot of fun with it. Just find something funny, post it, make it fun, just make it engaging, and that's what it's all about. Twitter's really good at providing analytics as well, so you can tell what works and what doesn't, and you can tell that really quickly. So I've put on this slide one of my tweets from this month. So I manage the Emerald HR management Twitter feed. So obviously I'm posting sort of leadership management, HR, business strategy, sort of articles in that. So this was about a call for papers from the Journal of Organizational Ethnography about police encounters. Obviously that's quite topical right now. So I've tagged the journal that the journal editors, they run this social media page themselves. So I've tagged that. So you can see that the impressions are quite high, the engagements are quite high, and it's not a bad engagement rate. So the impressions, if you're not sure what that means, that's the amount of times people have seen that tweet. So that's quite a lot. The engagements are the number of times the tweet has been interacted with. So that might be a retweet, that might be someone clicking the link, because this short link here, that's the link to the call for papers. It might be someone just clicking on the hashtag. It might even be looking at our profile, but it's all engagement. So that's really good. So some more general tips. Ask your institution. A lot of institutions have departments that are dedicated to helping their employees use social media to disseminate their research. ask the editor of the journal as well. Some journals have social media assistants on the journal, like an editorial assistant, who will basically just be using social media to, you know, tweet what's being in the journal, what's being published. They might run a page specifically for the journal. Again, the editors of a journal can ask us as the publishers to help with promotion. It really depends what publisher it is, at what publishing company and what journal, but you know, we at Emerald are really keen on this, so just ask away. Don't wait for your paper to be published either. Once it's been accepted, you're free to let people know about that. You know, I see lots of really excited people going, oh, look at this, guys, I've got my paper accepted, and they're really happy. So do that. Again, tag away, because relevant people will share that. If you think your paper is going to be really relevant and you're not able to publish open access, just think about speaking to the editor of the journal, and they can speak to the publisher, and we might be able to make it complimentary access for some time. So I've included an article here, and this was from a special issue of Equality, Diversity and Inclusion that did a Black Lives Matter special issue a couple of years ago. And we made this free when the issue was published because it was a special issue, and obviously it was really important research. And with recent events this year, we've made it complimentary access again. So this was one of the really popular articles from this, and this is about libraries on the front line. So you can see from the donut that it's had quite a lot of engagement. A lot of it is Twitter, to be fair, but you know, it's blogs and Facebook as well. I think it's had 8 citations so far. Use listservs, mailing lists to get that research out there. Consider writing for the conversation, which is it's classed as news on Altmetrics, I believe, but it publishes academics' research into a very like condensed, newsy, easy to read article. The authors do that themselves. You do have to be currently employed as a researcher or academic with a university or research institution to publish on the conversation. It doesn't cost you anything. It's a really popular site. I think I tweet from it nearly every single day because the content is so good. So just put a screenshot of what came in the business area on it this week. So it's another opportunity to get your research out there in a wider audience. So why not? Consider suggesting a special issue to an editor. So, you know, a good themed issue on topical content. Some journals also publish special sections in a regular issue. A special issue as well will contain some non-article content or NAC, such as a guest editorial. So that will be outside of a paywall, so that's really easy to share. Some special issues, if they're relevant and really topical, they will get made complimentary access when they're published, and that's great. And call for papers on social media does really well. So just to summarize, just ask your publisher, us as a publishing house and other publishing companies, they are invested in sharing your research as much as you are. So speak to the editor of the journal. They act as the gatekeeper between sort of authors and the publishers, and just ask them, and we'll be happy to help you share your content. And we're also looking at other ways of sharing content, such as blogs and podcasts and even YouTube videos. So anything that you can think of, why not? I mean, it will take time to get your research out there, but it's absolutely got nothing to lose by doing this. It can only help share your research more and get more eyes on what you were writing about. So I've included my email at the end there and my Twitter handle for the HRM, and that is my presentation. Thank you.
Fiona, thank you very much. And now let's move to Pawan, who is, in fact, a very highly cited person in his own right. So Pawan, please go right ahead.
Hello, everyone. I hope you guys are doing well and enjoying the webinar so far. I have been asked to talk about how to enhance citations of our research publications. In a way, it builds on some of the earlier presentations, and there is an overlap, so which is useful. I quickly go through that to keep more time for Q&A. So I'll share some kind of overview regarding number of things which we can do to enhance the citations of our work. So let me start and build on what Nicholas was sharing. why we are interested in citations. Apart from some of the things Nicholas was sharing, I have few other reasons. Number one, when we are looking for new recruits, is in particular researchers and so on, we quickly go and look for their citations. When we are looking for promotions, now and then we look for their citations. And if I take a step on one side and look at when I'm looking for recruiting new associate editors for my journal, we will quickly go and look for their citations. And if I look at what we do within British Academy of Management, when we are looking for things like Lifetime Achievement Award and so on, we are again looking for whether these scholars have been doing remarkable work and if they have been cited and so on. Okay. So when we talk about citations, we are looking at a number of key actors. Okay. The list goes something like this. Of course, you yourself is one of the key actors, and we have been talking about what you can do and so on. And later on, I'll talk about some of the tips which you can follow to enhance your citations. But now and then we forget about some of the other key actors who can really help to enhance your citations. And some of these other key actors are the publishers. So for example, in our case of British Journal of Management, when we are accepting and any article is published, we approach the authors to develop a short video. We also approach these authors if they want to do a short write-up about learning and teaching. And the publishers can also help to circulate a collection of abstracts on different listservs and so on, which tells your fellow researchers about the kind of research you have been doing and so on. The third kind of key actor is the employers. Okay, so employers, like a majority of the universities, they help to create repository, and within that, majority of our articles are saved and so on. And it's accessible globally to scholars and so on. Some of the other kind of key actors can be your fellow researchers. If you are part of networks, it helps to enhance your citations, as covered by earlier presenters. But we can also look into learned societies like British Academy of Management, like Academy of Management, where these learned societies are creating different conferences, different workshops, seminars, and awards, and so on. And again, via those mechanisms, you are able to enhance your citations by participating in different activities and so on. The other kind of key actors can be funders. So when you are submitting a report for a funded project, and if you're published and so on, so it's widely circulated. And of course, we have been talking about social media. Some of the tips for me, the first one is the key one. Until unless your research is really exciting and meaningful, it will not be easily cited. Okay, so right now, for a while, we have been talking about global challenges kind of research, and in the middle of the pandemic. So if you are pursuing some meaningful research related to pandemic, then I'm very sure it will be cited a lot. So within British Journal of Management, we did a special section on coronavirus. And within 2 weeks of publication of 4 commentaries, our Altmetrics score has gone up by 245%. So good research, timely, and so on can be really, really helpful. Presentation in your publications. By this, I mean, if you start from the title, the way you present your title, there are suggestions, don't use question marks. If you use columns and so on, it will be cited more. If you look into abstract, the way you present information in the abstract, there is a link with citation scores as well. The way you pick up your keywords, again, is really meaningful. And of course, the contents of your manuscript. But later on, the kind of work you are citing, that has also a link whether your work will be further cited or not. Okay. And you can follow up the presentation with lots of things on the social media which have been talked earlier. Okay, quality of outlets, Nicholas talked about highly kind of rated and leading journals which have high impact factor. Of course, if you publish there, the chances are your work will be cited more because of their rigorous process, because only high quality manuscripts get published there and so on. Nicholas also talked about review articles. Yeah, they are cited more because you act as a thought leader, and then only you are able to put together a review article. And as he was correctly pointing out, majority of the review journals, Academy of Management Review or Academy of Management Annals and so on, or International Journal of Management Reviews, their impact factor is extremely high. The other kind of tip is you acknowledge relevant research. Now and then when we look at manuscripts, scholars somehow don't cite the relevant kind of work. So if you don't cite relevant kind of work, then on what basis are you building your work? But if you cite properly the past work and build on that, then hopefully in future people will not only cite the original work, but they will also cite your work as well. And if you provide access to your manuscripts, publications, of course it will enhance the chances that people will read it and cite. So there is a strong emphasis if you can somehow make your publication converted to open access, then it helps a lot. Or things like ResearchGate, regularly if you are on that, scholars regularly request for manuscripts and so on. There are forums, and of course there is social media as well. The kind of other bits which I believe acts as facilitators to enhance your citations. So it's important you have right kind of profiles at relevant places. By this, I mean, and the kind of places I'm talking about have been talked earlier about, like ORCID, like Google Scholar, like website, like Scopus, and so on. So ensure you have your profile at these places and the right kind of profile. The visibility, there are lots of things which you can do to enhance the visibility of your publication. And one of them, one which is quite important in the UK and Australian kind of setup is the conversation. So you write something in your area of specialism on which you have lots of other publications and so on. So you are highlighting the visibility, and hopefully you can also create videos, you can do TED Talks and so on. Networks important, and by this I mean if we take example of the key conferences we go, we all tend to belong to specific streams or divisions or tracks, and within that if you are regularly going and presenting your work, then scholars tend to discover about your work, and then they tend to cite your work as well. Consistency, a highly practical one. Now and then we see people tend to change their name, which is not helpful because people are knowing you by a given name and you end up changing the name. It doesn't help a lot. Or if you change your names in the email or in your signature, or you tend to have taken a stance for a given kind of research and then you are making a U-turn and kind of falsify your claims. It can be an interesting scenario, but generally, if we can avoid that, that can be useful. Collaborations we have talked about, and reciprocity. If you cite others' work in a meaningful manner, hopefully they will also cite your work. I'll quickly go through some of the other slides. I think so these have been covered. So all these can be utilized to enhance your citations. This also has been briefly covered, where you can monitor what's happening. And again, these have been talked about. So I'd like to spend a couple of minutes on this one, because over the years, I have been seeing somehow people tend to do things which they should not be doing. So the first one, building on what Nicholas was talking about, we should not ignore anymore the significance and importance of citations for our career, for letting the world know about your research, for dissemination, and so on, because it matters. That's the positive side. But then I'm also observing, and like me, many others are also observing, where don't overdo it. By this, I mean, don't go too aggressive on social media by sending repeat messages, by repeat posts, and just creating kind of anxiety and pressure on people's inbox and so on. So don't overdo it. Don't missell things just because you are so anxious and you are so aspirational to enhance your citations, where you might end up mistreating the data, mistreating the analysis, or the kind of variables you have been using just to prove a point and so on. Please don't do that. Be ethical. And my observation now and then, when I see as an editor of a journal, I can see now and then scholars are trying to speak to others, where they say, if you cite my work, I'll cite your work. Of course, you can do so far, it's meaningful, but there is a very subtle and delicate line to what extent one should be doing. And building on this one, remember, our world of academia is a very small one, where the whole kind of emphasis should be how I create a positive image of myself. And some of you who are experienced, you must have seen so many examples where on a regular basis, scholars' manuscripts have been retracted because they were not treating the data properly and so on. So that's what I wanted to share. It's important. We keep an eye on what's happening with citations and do it in a meaningful manner, but also keep an eye that we are not crossing the boundary. Thank you, George.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Pawan, and thank you to all of our participants. And as I said at the beginning, we have some time for questions. And please use the chat box because there are too many people to get on the screens and ask questions verbally. But we're very happy to take on questions. If you put them in the chat box, then either one of our presenters will grab it or I will ask a question. So please feel free to type a message in the chat box and we'll see what comes across. But while people are thinking about that, I would like to actually ask our presenters, since they've heard each other, are there any further comments that they would like to make? Because I think that you come from related but different perspectives to this topic, and I wonder if there's anything that you would like to say about the other presentations you've heard. I'm getting some questions now, but please feel free to comment or comment further, make remarks around this topic.
One of the issues, George, that I would mention also is, of course, that before you can be cited, you must be published, and before you get published, you must get past the editor. So when you are framing the title of your paper, it needs to be specific, but not too specific. And also the abstract must be one that the editor will feel would be of interest to their readership. Without that, you won't get published and you won't get cited.
So Pawan, since you are an editor of major journals and have been for some time, how do you react to that comment from Nicholas?
I think so. It's important, and this is what I was indicating under the presentation point which I shared. But overall, my belief is only doing great work historically was good enough. But these days, you not only have to do a great piece of work, which is really meaningful, timely, and ticking all the boxes, making an impact and having social kind of influence and so on, but also utilizing some of the tools which we have been talking about to further circulate and talk about your research so that more and more recipient or the necessary kind of recipient of that kind of research can benefit.
So given that we have two presenters who come from a publishing company, do you think that the necessity to build that reputation in a proactive way rather than expecting that people will simply recognize quality and so on, do you think that we should, as a university, actually start to engage intermediaries to facilitate the very broad array of communications processes? We already do that, as you know, for research funding. We are people, so there seems to be a question here.
What I think I was trying to show with Altmetrics is that you have a lot more influence and power than you think you do, and you can do a lot to publicize and network yourself, so that you shouldn't be dependent so much on a publisher and editor. You never know exactly how the culture of that company, if they are going to be publicizing it. So I think it's really up to you to be networking and publicizing your work and working within networks.
So there is an interesting question here from Jazvir Mahil. What about self-published articles? We've been talking about articles that are published in what I would call recognized academic journals, and then how to further promote this. Rather like the music industry evolved from in a serious way, from these few key, let's call them publishers, to essentially self-publishing and using the web and so on to bypass this. Is there likely to be a future for self-publication here? Or do you think that the editorial and review processes are going to continue to dominate in the same way? Pawan.
Yeah, it depends on who the recipient of your research are. So if we have researchers who are pursuing academic careers, if we have researchers who are pursuing doctoral studies, or if we have serious researchers who are looking at how they are going to make non-academic impact based on their research, then certainly the process via which you end up publishing in top-tier journals is really, really required, because that acts as a quality gatekeeper, which ensures that the very high quality kind of research where we can have a list of boxes, they are ticked. Only then that kind of research will be published. Otherwise, on social media, we understand these days, if you look at, I don't know, Bollywood as an example, some top hero committed suicide, and the social media is just covering literally everything. So there is a dedicated kind of audience for each kind of research we are talking about. But today we are talking about academic, scientific kind of research, which helps to create new body of knowledge in a given field and so on.
Okay, so I see one of the questions that's come up is the one I raised originally. If someone is not skilled in the many dimensions of promotion which have been discussed here, is there in fact a role for the use of a professional intermediary? I was saying earlier that for grant applications, which are very complicated, and the different funding agencies are very complicated, we end up hiring people who are specialists in writing grant applications and so on. They don't decide what the academic work is, but they understand the processes much better. Do our presenters think that this is the way of the future? Because the complexity of what's going on now keeps increasing. I welcome from Daniel or Fiona, who are in the intermediary business, if you like, one way or another. Do you think this is going to be a trend?
I definitely believe so. Yeah, I think it's going to become just more and more essential to do. You know, I think the levels of output of research are only increasing as well. You know, whether exponentially, there's just so much research out there. So for it to be seen, there's going to have to be a lot more action taken on it rather than it just go into a journal. You know, from my perspective, if I have an author who wants some help with that, I am absolutely more than happy to help. I can help, build a profile. I can help them network. I'm happy to advise. Whether that's going to become sort of an actual, a dedicated role within publishing, it's probably too early to tell, but it's going to become something that everyone has to get much more adept at, I believe.
Comments from Pawan or Nicholas?
Yeah, so I see both sides of this. And if I use the variable of age here, so scholars who are into 50s or something, where they never were trained or they never had the aspiration to be really proactive on social media, and they continue to do good kind of research, not necessarily highly cited and so on. So their kind of aspirations are very different. Whereas the young junior faculty who are joining the world of academia, and they are seeing what's happening around them. So for these guys, there is no way out but to go and understand how to utilize these mechanisms and so on. And going back to the skills of writing research grants and so on, which is a massive, massive plus. So if you are, as George was indicating, if you are really good at writing research grants and so on, and perhaps not very good at utilizing social media or writing blogs or doing any of those things, perhaps that will not be a major issue. It will be a major issue if it is the other way. You are very active in social media and talking and doing all those kinds of things, but not concretely delivering on research grants or publishing in top tier journals. That will be an issue. So we can see it from different angles for whom we are talking here.
I can see that it is quite clear that if nobody knows about your research, it's rather difficult to expect them to cite it. So the first thing is you need to market your research and market your brand. And there are various tools to do that, as have been outlined through this presentation. Academics are very slow to self-promote. And without self-promoting, others will not know what it is you've been working on. And Pawan mentioned conferences, seminars, meetings, learning societies. There are so many places where your research can be brought to bear or can be made aware. So use them and think about yourself as a small business. You're promoting your work, and your work is research. If your research is good, then others will buy it. If your research is not good and you self-promote until the cows come home, then you're just creating a bad name for yourself.
Any further questions? A number of the things that have come up in the chat have been covered here. Let's see what's going on here. An articulation, yes. So I think certainly in my position as a dean, I have observed that over time, quite a long time, academic language is separated from the language that normal people use. And there are all sorts of long words and long sentences and things like that. So this language issue becomes a major hindrance in this broader communication. So if you're talking about policy relevant articles, it could be COVID or whatever, it doesn't matter, any policy relevant issue. No one's going to know what you say if you reference Heidegger and all this sort of stuff, when in fact you're talking about vaccines. And so how do we go about enabling people to speak to people who are not academics? Because the academic journal environment is academics writing for academics, and that's what a citation is. But in the end, the impact, which is very important, is with people who are not academics. And so I welcome, since all four of you are actively participating in the communication of things to the world at large. How do you think this is going to work?
I can start. So my take is it's a matter of training yourself. It's a matter of orientating yourself. And it's a matter of continuous learning and never forgetting the audience to whom you are going to speak via your work. So we can take both scenarios. The first scenario where majority of us are doing research and publishing, but we don't end up creating the non-academic kind of impact of our research. That if you take a step back and go back to your PhD training time, okay, a lot is taught: how to write, how to develop your arguments, and how to present them in a very concise manner, and so on. So if you don't have that training, some of us don't have, it's not a major issue, but you don't give up. So the next thing which I will suggest, on a regular basis, when we are thinking of publishing, we are thinking of 1 or 2 journals in our mind. So we want to target those journals. So again, go and read the way manuscripts are presented, the way arguments are presented, the way theories are discussed, the way methodology is presented, and so on. So very quickly you will find out, or very quickly you might be able to develop your own template, along which you need to develop your manuscript, and accordingly, hopefully, after some experience, and also get feedback from well-wishers, or if you are fortunate to have experts around you, request them to give feedback, because that will help to find out where you are lacking, and so on. But if you take the other side, which is practitioner-oriented journals, which are targeted towards practitioners, managers, and policymakers, then again we need a different kind of orientation, and we need a different style of presentation. And again, it'll go back to whether we are trained for that, whether we understand what kind of writing is needed, whether we can present our argument so that any leading practitioner looks at it, they'll say, yeah, it clicks to me. That's the challenge I was coming across, and that's the way I can handle it. So for me, training, orientation, and shortlisting these journals, and the theory and contribution, again, if you pick up any of these journals, you will very quickly discover the way these things are reported there.
If I can just toss in a comment, though, since I am the master of ceremonies, so I can get away with it. I've got to say that my observation of this whole process is there really are 2 audiences. There is the academic audience, which shares an outlook and a way of talking. I mean, your basic academic article is 45 pages long and the conclusion's at the end. A newspaper article, the point is in the headline, and from the headline you decide whether to read the article. It's really 180 degrees around, to make a caricature of it. And these 2 audiences actually operate in completely different ways. And so what Daniel and Fiona were saying, these are communications to a very wide audience that have to be expressed, whether in a few characters in Twitter or longer. They have to be expressed in words that people can grab, a whole lot of different people. And that is fundamentally more than just, as some people in the chat bar have said, more than, let's say, social media skills. It's not just using the social media, it's you putting in words that people will actually, words and images, indeed, that people will grab onto. And I think that that 2 audience, or really 2 culture issue, is one of the things that holds academics back from using the social media, using these channels that Daniel and Fiona have described very articulately, because they literally, it's not that they don't know how to use the channels so much as if they did, the people on the other end of this pipe wouldn't know what they'd said. And I think this is, as a person who's been in both of these worlds for some time, this is striking. And I believe that it's at the crux of this seminar. On the one hand, we're talking about citations, and we've had some very insightful comments on citations, but that's academic to academic, and academic to journal, and journal to academic. It's within the academic world. On the other hand, Daniel and Fiona are talking about reaching on a much broader basis, that donut and its components. This is the whole world. And almost all of it does not use the language you find in any academic journal at all. And I think that part of the issue here is if you want to be known, you could be known in the academic world, then your language is A. And if you want to be known in the other world, your language is B. And somehow we have to learn how to bridge this gap, because otherwise we're really people talking to each other in a different way.
Can I make one more comment, George?
Of course.
So we can see, if you pick up academic journals 10 years ago, and if you pick up those academic journals today, we can see increasingly more and more academic journals are asking scholars to start to address the practical applications of their research. Okay, so that is happening. And if we'll pick up these journals again in the next 5 years, I can see that kind of contribution would have further increased. If you look at academic institution like ours, where we are regularly encouraging scholars to get training in how to deal with social media, how they report their research, and so on. So we can see that as well. And the third point here is increasingly more and more business schools are having DBA programs. And scholars are now required to supervise DBA students, which we know is a different kind of orientation of research. So I believe in the next decade or so, we can see more convergence of these ideas coming together, where scholars will be required. And if I bring in the ref and the impact contribution within the UK kind of context, then very quickly scholars are finding out they are required to address the kind of impact, George, you are talking about.
So let me, before we end, Fiona and Daniel, you are from this other world in a fundamental sense now. What do you think about this issue?
Well, yeah, I mean, our goal with at Emerald is really to get outside of this this ivory tower, which is why we do things like podcasts, because then we're actually speaking to a researcher who, you know, their writing may be behind a paywall, for example. So somebody had mentioned in the comments about open access and traditional journals. So obviously with open access, you're going to have to get funding because you're going to have to pay an APC to get your article out in open access. And, you know, maybe your institution offers that, maybe use some of your research grant to do that if you have a very good article that you think will get traction. Those articles are going to be available to everybody, but it still needs to be written in a language that's accessible to people. So I think Pawan had a good point that if all you're doing is smoke and mirrors with social media and there's no real substance to your writing, then you're not going to go very far. So it has to go hand in hand. And I do think you need to be thinking about the real world impact of your writing, not just staying inside that echo chamber of scholars who are citing each other and who are just careerists trying to assure a position at the university. You know, you're doing research because you want to have an influence in the world and inform people who are not academics. So I think that that's something that you need to keep in mind, and that goes hand in hand with the way you promote yourself and the way you discuss your work outside of academia.
Yeah, exactly what Daniel said. I mean, our big, you know, focus is, you know, we want to publish your research, we want you to be cited and everything, and that's wonderful, but we also want it to do something else. And the only way that's going to do that is to get out of the journal and to a wider audience, you know, especially sort of the field that I'm in. You know, I've got such a focus on HR, you know, with what we're going through right now, how important is, you know, studies on HR policy right now. But those sort of HR practitioners running big corporations aren't going to be picking up a journal right now, you know, so they need it in a sort of a more snappy, a more, you know, accessible manner, but not to take away from the hard work that goes into people's research. It's just that we want to help disseminate that and make it readable for people. Not saying that it isn't, but it is academic, and not everyone is comfortable with that sort of language. You know, they might even see the title and be like, no, I don't understand this. So that's where we come in, and we want to do that, but we need you as well. We can't do it on our own. So it's all about us working together as well and finding the best solutions to do that. But it's what we want to do. So we want to promote you, but we need you to want to be promoted as well outside of the, as I said, the ivory towers.
Thank you very much. We have reached the end of the session, and we have to stick to the timetable because everyone has other commitments, especially in our context of running a university online and all of the implications this has. I want to thank the presenters very much. I think these are very insightful comments. As I said at the beginning, everything has been recorded. So if you want to reflect on this, you can get in touch with everybody in our domestic context in Aston with Pawan and Nicholas, with externally with Daniel and Fiona. And I'm sure we can continue all of this at some great length. There are a number of comments we didn't have time to get to. So thank you very much, everybody.
And thank you, George, for chairing this.
Yeah, thank you very much. We'll be sending the video out.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.